Saliva ran dry in my mouth as my eyes came upon my wife's body being prodded by the lifeguard. The compressions into her chest were far more violent than in the TV shows. I just sat there, not moving, not crying, just still as I watched them try to save her. By the time the ambulance arrived, I had finally psyched myself up enough to move, a part of me still certain this was nothing more than a horrific dream. I got into the ambulance and answered the questions the EMTs had. I'm not sure exactly what they asked because at that point, I think I was still running on autopilot. The doctors told me she had stabilized, but the fluid buildup in her brain and the lack of oxygen were concerning. She was in a coma, and they would have to wait until things got under control before they could do more extensive tests. The next couple of days, they let me pretty much live in the ICU with her. Nothing much changed. By Friday, the nurses had talked me into taking a break to go home and get some real rest. I didn't want to at first, but I finally relented after the doctor came in and pushed it further. I only saw him once a day, if that, and he said he wouldn't be coming by on the weekend anyway. He also made sure to assure me that there would be an on-call physician, but it wouldn't be him. The hot water hitting my face knocked me back out of my haze. My life was forever changed, even if Stacy made it out. I called her parents and they assured me they would contact everyone else so I could watch over their baby. They said they would be here on Monday, but that couldn't come quick enough. After the shower, I decided to get a good night's sleep in my bed for a change. Sleep didn't come. Why the hell would it? I couldn't stop thinking about her, so I grabbed my charger and a book to read and headed back to the hospital. The main entrance was locked, so I had to go up through the emergency room doors and maze my way through the halls until I reached the main hospital. It was clear from the signs I was not supposed to be doing this. It seemed to be an unwritten rule that you could stay in the ICU after hours as long as you stayed put. But coming in the middle of the night like this seemed to be frowned upon. The orderlies didn't outright stop me, but their looks were not pleasant. Right before I reached the intercom button to buzz myself into the ICU, I saw a pair of nurses exit the room, wheeling a gurney accompanied by a myriad of medical devices. I could see Stacy's tattooed arm through the space between their bodies. At first, I thought it nothing more than tests and waited for them to leave before buzzing myself in. The head night nurse, Sally, came to greet me with a worried look on her face and said, "Oh, Mr. Sharp, we were about to call." I stood there, not exactly knowing what she meant, and waited for her to explain. "Miss Sharp," she said hesitantly, as if trying to find the words, "your wife's condition worsened while you were gone, and our attempts to resuscitate her were unsuccessful. I'm so sorry," she said, as tears welled in her eyes. Her tears almost felt real, even though I had just seen my wife's seemingly still living body moments before. Before she could say another word, I numbly said, "Thank you," in a breathy tone. and walked in the direction the cart had gone. She yelled after me, but I had drowned out any and all sound other than my own heartbeat, which was growing by the minute. As soon as I turned the corner, I broke into a sprint, willing myself to find where they had taken my wife. It was no good, though the wasted minutes with that woman had given them ample time to get away. If I wasn't so goddamn stupid, I would have confronted them immediately, but how was I to know? They could be on any floor at this point, but every TV show had taught me the morgue is in the basement. As the doors opened, a familiar face was at the end of the hall. The same doctor who had told me he would be off for the weekend was standing there, thumbing through paperwork outside of a maintenance exit. I sat still, terrified he would notice me, but this was a doctor. There really should be no reason. Maybe he could help. But my gut told me to stay as silent as possible. Finally, he exited, the door closing behind him, and I ran as fast as I could to see where he was going. The door led out into a service ramp heading toward a side street next to the hospital, and there he was, walking briskly toward a building next door. I was too deep at this point and could they really blame me? My wife had just been suddenly pronounced dead, so I walked behind him until he entered another side room in the adjacent building. The walls of this new building were tiled a milky green, with a black and white checkered pattern running through the floor. I had entered just after him, but he was nowhere to be seen. Hallway after hallway, no one. Empty room after empty room. Then I saw a door marked Operation Room, one with a piece of paper covering the viewing window. This was the moment. I was criminally trespassing either way, but I was already here. I needed to find my wife. My palm was sticky with sweat as I turned the knob and entered. There was no one at first sight. Then my eyes focused on what lay on the metal table in the center of the room. Similar machines to the ones that accompanied my wife were hooked up to something small and round that I couldn't comprehend at first. This couldn't be real. This wasn't how medical science worked. What sat on the table was a head with no body attached, blood flowing in and out of the tubes, machines pumping rhythmically in the background. I stumbled over a metal trash can as it clanged over sideways, almost completely losing my footing, and just as quickly ran out the door. I ducked into the next room and listened as a pair of feet came stomping forward. Just barely, I could hear a voice mutter, "What the hell was that?" Then I heard a second voice over a walkie say, "Jensen, how is Miss McNally? We are prepping the body now. Should be ready for transfer in about 15 minutes, give or take." The voice in the next room responded with what felt like joy in his voice. "Sounds good. I'm just gonna keep an eye in here until it's time. Must have been a rat or something." The lifeless face burned into my retinas as I clutched my chest, trying to catch myself. I felt like I needed to gasp for air, but knew if I did, he would hear me, so I slumped down, trying to calm myself. I knew I needed to find my wife, and I needed to find her now. Before I could doubt myself, I busted back out the doors and ran downward, not exactly knowing where. Instead of hiding from the voices like before, I ran toward them, straight into a room where the doctor stood. As soon as I entered, all of the reckless courage drained from me as I saw my wife's tattooed arm once again lying there, headless. Those same machines pumping in a similar fashion as the ones before. "Mr. Sharp, please, you can't be in here." My breath escaped as I sucked in shallow bits, my eyes transfixed on nothing other than my wife's severed head, neatly placed in the back of the room. She was dead. There was no coming back from that. These monsters had killed her. What the fuck was this? What kind of sick fucking lab experiments were they doing down there? Before I could steal another moment to look at her, a man in blue scrubs barreled toward me, and I did the only thing that I could: run. It seemed the others had been alerted to my presence and tried to corral me, but I had to escape to tell someone. I must have been lucky solely based on their skeleton crew staff, because I got out and drove as quickly as I could to the police station. It took what felt like hours for someone to finally take my statement, and then they did nothing more than threaten me for being crazy. They finally saw the terror in my eyes because they sent someone to check. I shook involuntarily as we headed back toward the ICU, not knowing what would happen if the doctor saw me again. He wasn't there though, and the nurse assured the officer that the doctor was off duty for the weekend. She made sure to be very passive and understanding, explaining to him that the trauma of losing a loved one can make us go crazy. I felt sick. She had to be in on it also, but she assured us the body would be available in the morning to prove no foul play. That was enough for the officer. He walked me back to my car and tried to be sympathetic to my predicament, even though he dismissed every rebuttal I threw at him. Then the morning came. I sat in a nearby parking lot all night, afraid that the nurse in the blue scrubs would find me. In the safety of the daylight, I walked back into the hospital and was led by a completely new nurse to see my wife's body and sign paperwork. What lay on that table was not Stacy. It was her head and her tattoos, but it wasn't her. They tried to explain it away with how the body breaks down when a person dies and how the body bloats, but I saw the truth. I saw it all in their eyes. They are doing something horrific down in the lab, and no one knows but me. The officer promised he would ask to check it out when he could, but I knew that wouldn't go anywhere, so now I have to bury a body that isn't my wife's and live forever with the fact that she was stolen from me. I recently was on Indeed looking for a new job. I finally quit that one dead-end job everyone has at one point. Anyways, I was scrolling through and I found a graveyard shift security position opening. It was at the abandoned hospital in my hometown. I applied for it. Following the next day, I got a phone interview. My first shift was the next night from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. I left at about 9 o'clock p.m. the next night. As I pulled up to the hospital, I saw a person next to the hospital entrance waving at me. I got out and shook his hand. It turned out to be my new boss, Matt. "Hey Nick, are you ready for your first shift?" "Yeah, I think I am. I'm kind of nervous." "You will be fine. Just check the cameras, make your rounds, and follow the company rulebook. Your equipment is in the office." "Okay, cool. Rulebook?" Just in case of a break-in, etc., company policy to have everything written down for every situation. Matt looks at his watch. "I should get going. Good luck on your first shift." As Matt left, I went into the hospital and found the security office on the 3rd floor. I put on my uniform, picked up a flashlight and baton, and sat down in the chair. I noticed the rule book and I curiously opened it. I wish I knew then. I wish I had left. The rules were basic until they weren't. Rule 1. At the sign of a break-in, do not approach suspects. Contact the authorities and then your supervisor. Rule 2. If you see a woman wandering the 3rd floor on the cameras, hide under your desk. You will hear sobbing. Stay under the desk until you don't hear the sobbing. Rule 3. If you hear hoarse breathing from behind you on the 2nd floor, stop. Close your eyes, say, "Go back to your room, Mr. Johnson." Count to 10. And if the hoarse breathing stops, you may continue. Rule 4. You may hear a fire alarm on the 2nd floor. If this happens, run back to your office on the 3rd floor. You will be hunted. Close the office door and grab the cross from the desk drawer. Sit down with the cross and repeat, "In the name of God, I command you to leave," until the fire alarm stops. Rule 5. You cannot leave until 7 a.m. I thought it was some kind of hazing. I put the book back and I decided to make my rounds on the 2nd floor. At 11, I was about to make my way back up to the office when I heard it, the hoarse breathing. I froze. My blood went cold. I immediately remembered the rule book and closed my eyes. "Go back to your room, Mr. Johnson," I said, and I counted to 10. The hoarse breathing stopped, and I turned around, expecting to see Matt playing a prank on me. There was no one. It was 12 a.m. and I was checking cameras. I was still freaked out about what happened on the 2nd floor. I decided to memorize the rules just in case. At 1 a.m., I saw it. The woman on the camera, sobbing and walking toward my office. I hid under the desk. I was under there for an hour. I heard banging on my door and sobbing, and then, like that, nothing. 3 hours went past uneventful, thank God. Which brings me to just 15 minutes ago. It is now 5 a.m. and I was on the 2nd floor when it happened. The fire alarm went off. I tripped on something and sprained my ankle, and I had no choice but to go into the nearest room to hide. My battery is low as I am typing this. I can hear it. It is hunting me. I don't think it knows where I am yet, but that may change soon. I hear it getting closer. I survived on sheer luck. I was able to use my baton and a piece of wood to make the shape of a cross. Before I knew it, the fire alarm stopped, and it was 7 a.m. As I limped out of the hospital, I passed out outside. I woke up in a hospital, a splint on my ankle and an IV in my arm. A doctor came in and asked me my name and what I remember. I told him I worked security at the Wayland Oaks Hospital and I sprained my ankle. I didn't tell him what else had happened. To be honest, I still didn't believe it. I was later discharged and sent home. As I got home, I got a text from Matt. He let me know I had the next 3 days off and to get some rest. I've been trying to get sleep, but all I dream about is that damn hospital. I can't escape it. I see things in my house. There's a figure with a distorted face that is posing as a child. Whatever it is, it's been getting violent. It has tried to push me down my stairs, and it has made me feel physically ill when I go towards my front door. I think it's trying to trap me in my own home. I called Matt to let him know what's going on, but I got no answer. Just 10 minutes ago, I got a call from Matt. I explained what was happening.
Calm down. Here's what you need to do. Do you have a cross by chance?
I have one in my room. It used to be my grandfather's.
Good. Go grab it and walk around your house with it. Repeat, in the name of God, I command you to leave.
I went and grabbed the cross, but as I turned around, I saw it. It was now a tall figure with animal-like teeth. My blood went cold, and I brought the cross up in front of me and repeated the words. It kept on walking toward me. I was terrified. I started screaming, "In the name of God, I command you to leave." Eventually, everything went silent. I got back on the phone with Matt, and I told him it was gone. I told him I didn't think I wanted to work there anymore, but what he told me chills every bone in my body.
I'm sorry. You can't. The hospital has bound itself to you. You will be back at the hospital one way or another. I'm really sorry about this. We are the only thing that keeps those things in.
Matt invited me to brunch, and I accepted. As I pulled up to the restaurant, I saw Matt smoking a cigarette outside. He saw me, and we went inside and sat down. After we ordered, Matt started to explain more. As you know by now, this job isn't a normal job. Once you survive your first night, you're bound until the hospital takes you. Why not board it off? I mean, hell, why don't they demolish the damn place? It gets tricky every night. Different rules, different apparitions, but one stays the same. You encountered it in your house. It is why we do this, to keep it in. So this thing is bound to this hospital as long as someone is there and follows the rules? Exactly. It doesn't play fair, so we can't either. After brunch, I headed home and laid down on my couch. I had a giant headache, and I couldn't believe this was happening. I broke a rule, and it followed me home. I wish this was a bad dream, but it wasn't. I was scared, but what could I do? I was helpless. Matt texted me my next shift. It's in 3 days. So now I'll be back at the hospital. I'm afraid of what it will do if I don't. That thing in my house was from the hospital. I know it. It was a warning. I'm looking for ways out of it, but I can't find one. I still see a distorted face in the corner of my eye, watching my every move, waiting for me to come back, waiting for me to break another rule. Hospitals, a place where the sick are cured, the wounded healed, and the dying saved. It is also a place where new life comes into this world. One can call this a haven of healing and happiness. However, not all may think the same. For them, a hospital is a place of pain, sorrow, and death. A place where the lie, "it's nothing serious," is blatantly used. They even consider it worse than a prison, trapped in an empty room with machines attached to you and silence haunting you at each passing minute. As for me, I believe in the latter. After only 3 hours on my first day as an admissions clerk, I can say with surety that it is definitely not a haven. Sick and injured patients come with terrified expressions, unknowing of what they might get diagnosed with. It had only been a month since the hospital opened, and just yesterday they put up an urgent hiring advertisement for a clerk in the night shift. The quoted salary package was handsome, so naturally I applied. An hour later, I received a call from someone at the hospital. He wished to take the interview via call, to which I had no objections. After giving what I felt were the right answers, the person on the phone sounded pleased and offered me the position. I was told to join the very next day, which was pretty quick on their part. I assumed they must be short-staffed, as they concluded the hiring process in a matter of a few hours. That's how I ended up working here at this hospital. Looking at the structure of the hospital, one can tell it is a modern design. A small, minimalistic, square-shaped building with glass windows lining each floor. Though the hospital was not that huge, its simple yet clean design made it stand out from the rest of the worn-down buildings surrounding it. The ground floor was complete and operational. However, the upper floors, all the way to the 3rd level, were not. Construction had abruptly stopped. For some reason, which I assumed was due to lack of funds. Entering the hospital, you are greeted by the admissions desk on the center left and an elevator across it on the far right. On either side of the admissions desk were the patient wards. The ward doors had a high-tech lock system, which only opened when it scanned a special key card given to all staff members. In the front and right side of the hospital were various rooms allocated to doctors. During busy hours, patients and doctors alike would be seen entering and exiting these rooms. The striking thing about the hospital's interior was that there were no stairs that connected to the upper floors. The elevator was the only means used to access them, and it was closed off due to the construction. This wasn't an issue, as I was told there wasn't anything in the upper floors. My shift started at 8 p.m. and after only 3 hours, I was pretty exhausted. I looked to my left and saw Mr. Rahim, my fellow clerk as well as my superior, was doing just fine. Interacting with that many patients really drained me out. How do you stay this active and fresh after all that work? I asked Mr. Rahim as I rested my head on the desk. Well, I have been here for about a year, so I have gotten used to it, said Mr. Rahim with a smile. Besides, it's not that much work anyway, so get up. I don't want to see you lacking on your first day. I groaned as I got up. Thankfully, there hadn't been any new patients for some time, so I was able to rest up a bit. A pair of nurses passed by in front of us, whispering something among themselves. They looked a bit anxious as they sat down on a couch at a distance from me. The only things I could make out from their conversation were "disappeared" and "I hope they find her." They look a bit worried. Is everything alright with them? I asked Mr. Rahim, who too was watching the nurses. He didn't answer right away, and when I shifted my gaze towards him, I noticed that he had a troubled expression on his face. Since you now work here, I guess it is fair that you know as well, stated Mr. Rahim. Know what? I asked, as I cut in between what he was about to say. 2 days ago, a patient escaped the wards, and sadly, we have no idea where that patient is. Isn't it a possibility that the patient just left the building? It was a stupid question, but I couldn't help it. It is a possibility. However, the 48-year-old patient, Miss Lubna, was diagnosed with ataxia, and her condition was deteriorating quick. Not only that, but she also has acute blindness, so it is not possible for her to walk out from the building on her own. Besides, the hospital only has 2 exits, the main entrance and the back door, and the security cameras caught no footage of her leaving. The windows are also out of the option as they are completely shut. What about the police? Have they been informed of this? We haven't yet. The owners of the hospital are afraid that it would lead to a bad image of the hospital, so we are simply trying to find the patient on our own. What's worse is that is not the only issue. There's more? Apparently, the clerk whose position you filled in, Mr. Camran, has also been missing since that day. The last footage of him was entering the patient's ward. After that, him and Miss Lubna simply vanished without a trace. I tried to take this all in. It sounded comical, almost like Mr. Rahim was teasing me on my first day, but his expression remained serious throughout. Even now, there was no hint of a smile on his face. Don't wrap your head around this too much. I only told you this so that you weren't in the dark about it. For now, just focus on your work. Easier said than done. How was I supposed to entirely ignore that story and focus on work? I just gave a nod and started to arrange some papers. It was now almost 12 a.m. 2 doctors, Dr. Hazan and Dr. Faizan, were idly chatting in front of me while 3 nurses sat on the couches. Basically, all the night shift staff was killing time in the main area. I wasn't myself doing anything, but aimlessly scrolled through my social media when a single ding interrupted us. The elevator panel lit up and showed that the elevator was coming down from the 3rd floor. Mr. Rahim, I thought the upper floors were empty and there was no one up there. I asked, a bit puzzled. I was told the same, said Mr. Rahim, as he got up and made his way around in front, blocking my view. Another ding signaled that the elevator had reached the ground floor, and the doors slowly started to open. I tried to get a glimpse of who it was, but the people in front of me blocked my view. Then I heard one of the nurses scream, followed by 2 words from Mr. Rahim that sent a chill down my spine. Dear Lord. I got up from my chair and almost puked at what I saw. In the center of the elevator was a heavily mutilated corpse of what was once a person. The arms and legs had been ripped off and interchanged with one another, meaning the legs were sticking out from the arm sockets and the arms from the leg sockets. The head had been cut off clean and was planted in the chest. The inside of the elevator was covered in blood, and on the back wall was written, "Not the one in blood." Everyone stood frozen in shock at what they saw. Dr. Hassan was the first one to come out of shock and move towards the body. He called for someone to help him move the body, but no one moved an inch. He then motioned towards me, which brought me back to my senses. I shakily went to him and lifted the body out of the elevator. The moment we stepped out of the elevator, the doors closed behind us and the elevator powered off. What the hell just happened? And whose body is that? Shouted Dr. Faizan. Mr. Rahim and Dr. Hassan slowly examined the body. Suddenly, Mr. Rahim stopped and exclaimed, "Lord, I think this is Kamram." The face is heavily disfigured, but these were the clothes he was wearing the day he went missing. I tried to absorb all of this. The previous clerk shows up dead, and his body is heavily disfigured, and what could possibly be assumed as the work of a psycho killer, which meant we now have a problem on our hands. Let's call the police now. There could potentially be a psycho killer hiding in the upper floors, I said. Like hell we are. The owner strictly told us to solve the issue without involving any outside party. I don't want to lose my job here because of some wannabe smartass kid, replied Dr. Faizan. Are you crazy? There is a dead body here. This is no longer a matter that we solve ourselves. Dr. Faizan was spewing nonsense. How can we stop a suspected killer ourselves? Alright, that's enough. Let's first put the body somewhere for now and clean up the blood here. We have patients in the ward, and I don't think it would be good if any one of them saw this sight. We should keep this to ourselves for the moment and see what we can do, said Dr. Hassan. True, it would be better for us to close off the hospital for the night as well, to prevent any more people entering the building, added Mr. Rahim. His eyes showed terror. Dr. Hassan nodded at that, and turned away from everyone else. At that moment, I clearly saw the fear in his eyes. He was trying his best to stay calm, but everything that just happened was too much. Dr. Hassan faced us all again, and then directed each of us some tasks. After some complaining, Dr. Faizan and 2 other nurses carried the dead body to the emergency room. The other nurse and Dr. Hassan went to explain the ruckus to the rest of the patients in the ward as being merely a drunkard entering the hospital. Me and Mr. Rahim went to close down the entrance. We pulled down the shutters in front of the hospital doors and turned off the lights outside. I don't know what's even going on here. First 2 people went missing here, and then one of them turns up dead, muttered Mr. Rahim. I wasn't doing any better myself. My hands were shaking violently as I secured the shutter in place. At about 1 a.m., we all gathered back in the lobby. I was the first to break the silence. What do we do now? If all goes well, we may be able to make it through the night, but then what? It would be wise to call the police, but as Dr. Faizan pointed out, we shouldn't involve any outside party. We would be the prime suspects if the killer simply escapes the roof. The other issue we would face is that we weren't able to guarantee safety for our patients as Miss Lubna is still missing, responded Dr. Hassan. I started to question again, but then the lights went out. Even the backup generator didn't start. The only light now was coming from the street lights outside. Before we could react, the elevator panel once again lit up with a ding, and the elevator slowly went up to the 3rd floor. All of you hide somewhere. Either the killer is sending down Miss Lubna, or the person is coming down themselves, commanded Dr. Hassan. The doctors and nurses hurriedly hid in the doctor's rooms. Me and Mr. Rahim hid under the admissions desk. I would rather not imagine what the killer might have done to Miss Lubna's body. I try to calm down my breathing so that I don't give myself away. After about 10 seconds, a ding sound pierced the silence, and I heard the elevator doors open. I held my breath, hoping it wasn't anything worse, but obviously, I was wrong. Following the sound of the doors opening, I heard a footstep, and then another. Whoever it was had just exited the elevator. The elevator doors then closed. The person slowly made their way towards the admissions desk. I clasped my hand over my mouth so that I didn't make any noise. I had no way of telling who it was. Was it the killer? Did that person have any weapons with them? The footsteps stopped. The only thing separating us and that person was just a thin layer of wood. I then heard something smack the desk right above me. "Dear, is anyone here?" It was a female's voice. I turned to Mr. Rahim and he mouthed the words, "Miss Lubna." I tried to get up, but Mr. Rahim held me down and signaled me to wait. Before I could object any further, Mr. Rahim's eyes suddenly widened. He was looking at something behind me. I slowly turned around and froze in horror. It was dark, but the light from the street lights outside was just enough to see. Miss Lubna's neck had extended 10 meters and her head was searching behind me. From the sound of light tapping her fingers on the table, on the desk above, I could tell that her body was still standing right where it was before. I was scared, too scared. My body refused to move. I could not believe what I was seeing. "Where are you?" asked Miss Lubna. It almost sounded like she was mocking us. Her head turned around and our eyes met. They were completely white, and she had a grin on her face. A second passed, then another. Her head slowly scanned both me and Mr. Rahim and then retracted back. I heard footsteps move away from the desk. "Where are you, dear? Is no one going to welcome me?" I slowly let out my breath. I had no idea I was holding it in. Furthermore, I looked at my hands and saw they were shaking violently. I looked towards Mr. Rahim and saw that he was sweating. "What is that thing?" I whispered. My voice was trembling. Mr. Rahim just shook his head. It looked like he had lost his voice. A door opened to the right, and I heard hurried steps towards Miss Lubna. It's Miss Lubna. She looks alright. We should attend to her and see if she suffered any injuries. It was Dr. Faizan. Doctor, wait. Something's not right, shouted Dr. Hassan, but it was already too late. Dear, is that you? I silently glanced over the desk and saw the horror unleash. Dr. Faizan stopped just a few steps from Miss Lubna. Dear, you don't look right. Let me fix you up, said Miss Lubna as she jumped on top of Dr. Faizan. What are you doing, woman? Get off of me, shouted Dr. Faizan. Then I heard a bone crack followed by a scream. Miss Lubna ripped out Dr. Faizan's right arm. Dr. Faizan howled in pain as blood splattered the floor. Yes, let the hot nectar slip forth and bathe me in red. Let me drink the wine of thy sacrifice, shouted Miss Lubna. I was frozen in fear yet again. My legs refused to move. Mr. Rahim was the same. His eyes were transfixed on the horror. We didn't move an inch. I couldn't see properly due to the darkness, but it looked like Miss Lubna shoved her hand straight into Dr. Faizan's chest, after which he stopped moving. Oh dear, you stopped moving. You were not the one then, said Miss Lubna as she got up. I did hear the presence of one other nearby. I'll make sure my playthings don't leave just yet. With that, she raised her hands towards the sky and started chanting in an unknown language. Just as she finished, I grabbed my left hand as I felt a burning sensation in my left wrist. Mr. Rahim was also clutching his left hand. The pain subdued in a few seconds, and a red mark that resembled the mathematical division sign showed up where the pain began. Miss Lubna dragged Mr. Faizan's body with one hand and held his arm in the other and headed towards the elevator. You may not be the one, but you'll do for now. The elevator doors opened and she got in, dragging Mr. Faizan's body. I got one last look at her, blood-smeared grin before the elevator doors closed. The elevator traveled to the 3rd floor, after which the panel turned off. With that, the lights in the hospital came back on. What in the world just happened? Questioned Mr. Rahim. Dr. Hassan also came out from the doctor's room. It seemed like he closed the door once Miss Lubna attacked Dr. Faizan. I don't like using this term because it makes me sound unprofessional, but that thing was no human. It was definitely a demon, stated Dr. Hassan. One of the nurses came out of hiding and darted towards the hospital entrance. I don't want to die, she muttered. As soon as she grabbed the door, she screamed and then doubled over. I must have found my strength because I ran towards her. With Dr. Hassan right behind me, I looked to see what happened and saw that the nurse's left arm was completely covered in burn marks. What is going on? Said Dr. Hassan in a low voice. We carried the nurse back and laid her on one of the couches. Within seconds, some patients came out of the wards demanding to know about the screaming. Some were clutching their left wrists as well, which I assumed they too got the mark. Upon seeing the blood in the lobby, they stopped. Is that blood? Asked one of them. We have a situation on our hands, stated Dr. Hassan as he tried to hide the fear evident on his face. I looked towards the elevator, the panel blank as if it never once turned on.